Losing that person was a sign, not destiny, that's the truth. The question that found you. You still think about them. Not every day, maybe. But in those specific moments when the world goes quiet and there is nothing left to distract you, they are there. A thought. A flash. A feeling that wraps around your chest before you even have time to decide whether to let it in. And the most disorienting part is not the memory itself. It is the question underneath it, the one you have never been able to fully silence. Why did this one hurt differently? You have lost people before. You have survived endings before. But this one left something behind that ordinary heartbreak does not leave. Not just sadness, not just the ache of absence, something closer to confusion. A deep, restless sense that there was more to that connection than what the surface showed, and that the way it ended was not random, even if you cannot explain why you believe that. Your mind has tried to shut that feeling down. It has offered you every rational explanation available. People grow apart. Timing was wrong. It simply did not work out. And for a while, maybe those explanations held, but they never fully satisfied, because somewhere beneath the logic, beneath the grief, beneath every version of the story you have told yourself and others, there is a layer of knowing that keeps returning, quiet, persistent, unmistakable. You have probably told people you are fine. You have probably convinced yourself for stretches of days or even weeks that you had moved past it. And then something small, a song, a smell, a particular quality of afternoon light, brings it all back with a force that surprises you. Not because you are weak, because this was never ordinary. And something in you has always known that. That knowing is not a wound. It is a signal. The universe does not speak in plain language. It does not send messages through convenience or comfort. It speaks through the things that shake you, through the connections that crack you open, through the losses that refuse to behave like ordinary losses, and what you have been interpreting as unresolved heartbreak, what you have been treating as something to get over, maybe one of the most precise and deliberate communications your soul has ever received. Most people will spend their entire lives misreading messages like this one. They will assign the pain to bad luck, to poor timing, to the wrong person. They will carry the weight of it without ever discovering what it was carrying for them. They will heal the surface and leave the signal unanswered. You are not going to do that. Not today. This video exists because you were meant to hear this specific truth at this specific moment in your life. Losing that person was not the story. It was the sign. And by the time this ends, you will not only understand what the universe was telling you through that loss, you will feel, with a certainty that needs no proof, that everything that broke you was already in the process of rebuilding you into something that pain alone could never have created. Do not look away. The message is already unfolding. Not every soul is meant to stay. You were taught a lie about love, not by bad people, not with bad intentions, but a lie nonetheless, one so deeply embedded in the stories you grew up with, in the songs you memorized before you understood what they meant, in every narrative that promised you that if the connection was real enough, it would last, that the depth of a love was measured by its permanence, that if something ended, it must not have been true. You absorbed that belief before you had the critical faculty to question it. It arrived dressed as romance, as wisdom, as the natural order of things, and by the time you were old enough to experience real loss, the belief was already structural, already part of how you interpreted every ending. If they left, something must have been insufficient. If it did not last, something must have been wrong. With them, with you, with the love itself. But what if permanence was never the point? What if some souls were never designed to stay? Not because the love was insufficient, not because you were unworthy, not because you did anything wrong, but because their entire purpose in your life was never to remain. What if the most significant souls in your journey are precisely the ones who arrive with an expiration written into the agreement, an agreement your conscious mind never signed, but your soul understood before the first conversation ever happened? This is not a comforting metaphor. This is an ancient truth. Across traditions separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, the same understanding surfaces, that souls do not meet by accident, that certain connections are prearranged at a level of existence that the waking mind cannot access, that some people enter your life not to build a future with you, but to deliver something to you. A lesson, an awakening, a fracture through which a completely different version of yourself begins to emerge. The Buddhists speak of it as karmic entanglement, bonds formed across lifetimes that must be resolved, completed and released before either soul can move forward. The Hindus name it Rananubandha, the debt of connection, the sacred obligation of souls who agreed before birth to find each other and finish something that was started long before this body existed. Indigenous traditions across continents share the understanding that certain relationships are not accidents of geography or circumstance, but appointments, encounters written into the fabric of a soul's path long before the physical world arranged the meeting. They are not your destination, they are your initiation. And here is the part that will stay with you. The depth of the pain you feel when they leave is not evidence that they were supposed to stay. It is evidence of how completely they fulfilled their purpose. The more they cracked you open, the more precisely they did what they came to do. The grief is not proof of a mistake. The grief is the receipt, confirmation that the exchange happened exactly as it was meant to. You did not lose them. You completed something with them. Sit with that for a moment, not as a concept to evaluate, but as a felt sense, because there is a part of you that has always known the exchange was real, that what passed between you and that person was not ordinary, that the intensity of the connection was not coincidence or chemistry alone, but recognition. Two souls that knew each other before this moment, completing something that had been waiting to be completed. The grief, then, is not only for the absence of a person, it is the weight of completion, the particular heaviness of something that was significant being finished, and you were never supposed to carry that heaviness indefinitely. You were supposed to understand it, and then set it down. But that raises a question your mind is already forming, and it is the right question. If this was all part of a design, why does it feel so chaotic? Why does something that was supposedly meant to happen feel so much like something that went terribly wrong? The answer to that is what most people never discover, and it begins with understanding how the universe actually communicates. Because it has been speaking to you this entire time, through the exact thing you have been trying to survive. The universe speaks in the language of loss. The universe has never sent a message through comfort. Think about that for a moment. Every genuine turning point in your life, every moment where you fundamentally shifted, where something in you changed at a level deeper than habit or decision, arrived through disruption, through something being removed, through the collapse of something you were certain you needed. Comfort preserves, disruption transforms, and the universe is always, without exception, in the business of transformation. This is not a cruel design, it is an efficient one. Comfort is the language of maintenance, the signal that the current state is adequate, that no significant movement is required. Disruption is the language of evolution, the signal that the current state has reached its limit, and that something larger is waiting on the other side of the discomfort. The universe does not disrupt carelessly. It disrupts surgically, precisely, at exactly the moment when the soul has developed enough capacity to survive the disruption and grow from it, even when the soul does not yet believe that about itself. Loss is not the opposite of divine order. Loss is one of its primary instruments. When something is taken from you with a force that seems disproportionate to the circumstances, when an ending arrives that shakes not just your emotions but your entire understanding of yourself and your place in the world, that is not chaos. That is precision. That is the universe applying exactly the amount of pressure required to move you from where you were to where you are being called. The ancient Hermetic principle of correspondence states it plainly, as above, so below, as within, so without. Nothing in the external world of a soul's journey appears without a corresponding movement in the internal world, which means that when something as significant as this loss arrived in your life, something equally significant was being set in motion inside you, whether you were aware of it or not. Consider the metaphor of tectonic plates. The surface of the earth appears stable, unchanging, solid, until the moment it does not. The earthquake feels like catastrophe. It is, at the surface level. But beneath the surface, what is happening is the resolution of an immense pressure that has been building for far longer than the quake itself lasted. The disruption is not the problem. The disruption is the release. And in the geological record, every catastrophic shift is followed by the emergence of new land, new terrain that did not and could not exist before the disruption made it possible. You were not a victim of what happened. You were the subject of it. And there is a critical difference between those two positions. A victim is acted upon by forces indifferent to their existence. A subject is at the center of a movement that has a direction, a purpose, and an intelligence behind it. The loss did not happen to you the way weather happens to a field. It happened for you, in the way a surgical incision happens for a patient, precise, uncomfortable, and entirely oriented toward healing something that could not be reached any other way. But here is what makes this difficult to accept. The universe does not explain itself in the moment. It does not send a message alongside the loss that reads, "This is what this means. This is where it leads. This is what you are becoming." It speaks first. The explanation comes later, and only to those who learn to read the language. Which means that right now, in this moment, you may be sitting in the middle of a message you have not yet decoded. The people who never learn to read it spend their lives accumulating losses, without understanding what any of them were pointing toward. They develop a relationship with grief that is circular, the same wound reopening in different forms, the same pattern arriving in different faces, the same lesson presenting itself with increasing urgency until it is finally received. Because the universe is patient in a way the human mind is not. It will send the same message as many times as necessary, in as many forms as required, until the soul is ready to receive it. And the most important part of that message has nothing to do with the person who left. It has to do with you, specifically, with the part of you that you were projecting onto them without realizing it. Because what you believed you lost, and what you actually lost, are not the same thing. And that distinction is about to change everything. You were not in love with them. You were in love with what they mirrored. This is the chapter most people are not ready to hear. Not because it is cruel, but because it is precise. And precision, when it lands on a wound, creates a particular kind of discomfort that feels like resistance but is actually recognition. So stay with this. Let it move through you before you decide what you think about it. You were not entirely in love with them. You were in love with what they reflected back to you. Carl Jung spent decades mapping the architecture of the human psyche, and one of his most enduring discoveries was this: we do not fall in love with people. We fall in love with the parts of ourselves that we see activated in their presence. The qualities you adored in that person, their depth, their freedom, their warmth, their intensity, their way of making the world feel more alive. Those were not foreign qualities you were borrowing from them. They were dormant qualities inside you, suddenly illuminated by the mirror they held up. Jung called this the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine principles that every human being carries regardless of gender. These inner figures, built from the earliest experiences of love and longing, become the template against which we measure every significant connection. When someone activates that template, when their particular combination of qualities matches the shape of what lives inside us, the recognition is electric, instantaneous. It feels like fate precisely because, at the level of the psyche, it is. Not fate in the sense of external predetermination, but fate in the sense of perfect internal correspondence. They fit something inside you because they were always a reflection of something inside you. That is why the loss feels like losing a part of yourself, because in a very real sense you were. When they left, the mirror went with them, and suddenly those parts of you that had been so vividly alive in their presence seemed to disappear, not because they were gone, but because without the reflection, you could no longer see them. And the grief you have been feeling, at its deepest layer, is not just the grief of losing a person. It is the grief of losing access to a version of yourself you had only just begun to know. This is what Jung called the projection, and its retrieval is one of the most profound acts of psychological and spiritual growth a human being can undergo. The process works like this. A quality that has not been fully integrated into conscious identity gets projected outward onto another person. You do not yet own your depth, so you experience it as their depth. You do not yet own your freedom, so you experience it as their freedom. You do not yet own your capacity for full aliveness, so you experience it as something they gave you access to, something that disappears when they do. The retrieval of the projection means reclaiming that quality as your own, recognizing that what you saw in them was always, first and most fundamentally, a report about you. Because here is what the loss was actually offering you. The invitation to stop searching for that reflection in another person and to begin finding it within yourself. The person was never the source. They were the signal, a living, breathing indication of what already existed in you, waiting to be owned, integrated, expressed without the need for an external mirror to validate it. The part of you that came alive around them did not die when they left. It is still there. Quieter now, perhaps. Less accessible without the mirror, but present as it has ever been, waiting beneath the grief, beneath the confusion, beneath every story you told about why things ended, for you to turn toward it directly. And here is what turning toward it actually looks like. It is not a grand moment of self-discovery. It is a quiet, repeated choice to ask a different question. Instead of what did they bring out in me that I cannot find on my own, the question becomes, where does this quality live inside me? And what has been preventing me from accessing it without an audience? That question, asked with genuine curiosity rather than grief, is the beginning of one of the most significant journeys a human being can take. But before you can do that, you need to dismantle one more illusion, one that has been keeping you anchored to the past with more force than the grief itself. It is the story you have been telling about destiny, about what was meant to be. And the truth about that story is something most people spend their entire lives never questioning. And the myth of meant to be. Somewhere in the architecture of your pain, there is a belief quietly doing more damage than the loss itself. It sounds like this: we were meant to be together, or its darker twin. If it was real, it would have lasted. These are not innocent thoughts. They are invisible prisons, and they have been holding your soul in a past that has already completed its purpose, preventing you from seeing what the present moment is actively trying to show you. The concept of destiny in relationships has been one of the most misunderstood spiritual ideas in human history. Here is what people believe destiny means: a fixed, predetermined outcome. One person, one path, one result that was written before you were born. And if it does not materialize exactly as imagined, then either the destiny was wrong or you were. This version of destiny is not spiritual wisdom. It is magical thinking dressed in the language of faith, and it is quietly destroying the capacity of millions of people to receive what the universe is actually offering them. It is also, when examined closely, a profoundly self-centered cosmology. It positions the universe as a wish fulfillment engine, an intelligent force whose primary purpose is to arrange human romantic outcomes according to individual preference. It treats destiny as a promise rather than a process. And when the process leads somewhere the preference did not anticipate, the entire framework collapses, leaving not just grief, but the specific, devastating grief of feeling cosmically abandoned, of believing that the universe promised you something and then broke its word. That grief is uniquely cruel, and it is based entirely on a misreading of what destiny actually is. Real destiny is not a destination, it is a direction. It is not about a specific person arriving and staying forever. It is about a soul moving through a series of precisely orchestrated experiences toward its fullest expression. Some of those experiences are beautiful, some of them are devastating, all of them are necessary, and the people who appear along that path, including the one you lost, are not the destiny itself. They are instruments of it. Numerology has long understood this. the numbers embedded in the timing of significant events, the age at which certain meetings occur, the sequence of dates that mark beginnings and endings, are not coincidences. They are coordinates, markers on a map that the soul is navigating, often without the conscious mind's awareness. The timing of your loss was not arbitrary. It was a coordinate, a specific point on your soul's journey where a particular kind of pressure was required, where the trajectory needed to shift, and where that shift could only be initiated by something significant enough to break through the inertia of the patterns you were living inside. Every significant relationship in your life falls within what numerologists identify as personal year cycles, 9-year rhythms that govern the quality of experience available to a soul at any given point. Relationships that begin in certain years carry specific energetic assignments. Endings that occur in others carry different ones. The year of your loss was not random. It corresponded to a cycle whose entire purpose was completion, the clearing of what had been built so that a new foundation could be laid on ground that had been properly prepared. And here is the question that cracks the myth wide open. If that person was truly your destiny, your final destination, why did the universe, which is entirely capable of keeping things together, allow them to leave? Not because the universe failed, not because you failed, but because the destiny was never them. The destiny was who you become in the aftermath of losing them. And that becoming cannot happen while you are still holding on to the story that their presence was the point. The real sign was never about them staying. It was about what their leaving was designed to wake up in you. And that awakening, the specific thing this loss was designed to activate, is more precise, more personal, and more transformative than anything you have yet allowed yourself to consider. Because the heartbreak you experienced was not just pain, it was a coded message. And the code is about to be broken. Heartbreak as a redirectional sign. Every sign the universe sends has a direction embedded in it. Not a vague poetic direction, a specific one. A pointing away from something that was keeping your soul contracted and towards something that requires a more expanded version of you to receive it. And heartbreak, when it is of the magnitude you experienced, is one of the most directionally precise signs available to a soul in human form. Think about what existed in your life before that relationship, the patterns you were living inside, the version of yourself you were presenting to the world, the dreams you had quietly shelved, the needs you had learned not to voice, the boundaries you had never quite been able to draw. Now think about what that relationship activated, the longing it brought to the surface, the inadequacies it exposed, the depths of feeling it revealed in you. That contrast is not accidental. It is the sign reading itself to you, because a redirectional sign works through contrast. It shows you, in the most visceral and undeniable way possible, the distance between where your soul is being called and where you have been willing to go. The pain of the loss is proportional to the size of the redirection. The more it hurt, the more significant the course correction, the more disorienting the aftermath, the more fundamental the shift your soul is being asked to make. Think about a compass. When the needle is pointing in the wrong direction and you try to force it, there is resistance, a physical tension between where the needle is being pushed and where it is being called. That tension is not evidence that the compass is broken. It is evidence that the magnetic field is working. The discomfort you have been living inside since this loss is the felt experience of that tension, the push and pull between the direction you were moving and the direction your soul has been oriented toward all along. The loss did not create the misalignment. It revealed it. It made the tension undeniable. It removed the relationship that had been, however unconsciously, providing a reason to remain in a direction that was never truly yours. You were not rerouted away from love. You were rerouted toward a version of yourself that is capable of a completely different quality of love, one that does not require you to lose yourself in another person in order to feel whole, one that does not mistake intensity for compatibility or familiarity for rightness, one that is grounded in the knowledge of who you are, what you need, and what you will and will not accept, knowledge that can only be earned through exactly the kind of experience you have just survived. But here is what most people do with this redirection. They resist it. They pour their energy into understanding why the loss happened rather than where it is pointing. They treat the sign as the destination instead of reading what it indicates. And in doing so, they remain exactly where the loss found them, frozen at the intersection, staring at the sign, never taking the step it is pointing toward. The resistance is understandable. Moving in the direction the sign indicates requires admitting that the direction you were moving was not serving you. And that admission carries its own grief. The grief of acknowledging that some part of what you were building needed to be dismantled. Not because it was worthless, but because it was incomplete, because it was constructed on a version of yourself that was always meant to be a stage, not a destination. You are not most people. Otherwise, you would not still be here. And the fact that you are still here, still listening, still willing to consider that there is more to this story than grief and confusion, is itself a sign, one that connects directly to what has been happening inside you throughout this entire experience. The chaos, the racing thoughts, the emotional noise that has not followed any rational timeline. That inner storm was never the problem. It was always the message. And it is time to finally hear what it has been saying. Why the chaos inside you is not a breakdown. It is a broadcast. You have probably been trying to make it stop. The loop of thoughts that replays the relationship at 3 a.m, the waves of emotion that arrive without warning and without logic, the simultaneous presence of grief and anger and longing and relief and guilt, sometimes within the same hour. You have tried to manage it, suppress it, rationalize it, outlast it, and it keeps returning, not as punishment, not as malfunction, as transmission. Your inner world is not chaotic because something is wrong with you. It is chaotic because it is attempting to process a message at a frequency that your conscious mind was not previously tuned to receive. The emotional turbulence is not noise. It is signal, dense, layered, urgent signal from the part of you that exists beneath personality, beneath conditioning, beneath every story you have constructed about who you are and what you deserve. Modern psychology has a clinical vocabulary for what happens in the aftermath of significant loss. Complicated grief, attachment disruption, emotional dysregulation. These are accurate descriptions of the symptom, but they miss the message. They treat the broadcast as a malfunction to be corrected, rather than as a communication to be received. And the treatment they offer, management, coping, the gradual return to baseline, is the equivalent of turning down the volume on a fire alarm because the sound is inconvenient. The alarm is not the problem. What it is reporting is what requires your attention. That deeper part of you has been trying to get your attention for a long time, and it is entirely possible that this relationship, and its ending, was the only disruption significant enough to finally break through the surface. Because that is what profound loss does. It does not just create pain, it creates a crack. And through that crack, things that were buried begin to move. Patterns that were invisible become visible. Needs that were silenced begin to speak. Truths that were carefully managed begin to insist on being heard. The specific texture of your emotional chaos is not random. The particular combination of what you feel, the anger that flares in unexpected directions, the longing that arrives at illogical times, the guilt that attaches itself to things that do not quite make rational sense. Each of those threads is a different frequency of the same broadcast. The anger is reporting something about boundaries that were crossed and not named. The longing is reporting something about needs that were present but not fully voiced. The guilt is reporting something about places where you were not fully honest, with them, or with yourself, or both. The chaos is the sound of your soul reorganizing itself around a deeper truth, which means the worst thing you can do right now is silence it. The second worst thing is to direct all of it toward the person you lost, to spend the energy of this broadcast on replaying what was said, what was not said, what could have been different. That is not processing, that is postponing, and every day spent in that loop is a day the actual message goes undelivered. The practice that changes everything is simple but not easy. Instead of asking why did they leave, begin asking, what is this asking me to become? Instead of directing the emotional energy backward toward the loss, begin directing it forward, toward the version of yourself that this entire experience has been in the process of building. Let the anger inform your understanding of what you will no longer accept. Let the longing point you toward what you genuinely need, rather than what you were settling for. Let the guilt reveal the places where greater honesty, with yourself, first, is being requested. That shift, from victim of circumstance to student of experience, is not just a mindset adjustment. It is a spiritual act of the highest order, and it connects directly to one of the most powerful principles ever applied to the experience of human suffering. A principle that does not ask you to feel less. It asks you to understand with complete clarity what belongs to you, and what was never yours to carry in the first place. The dichotomy of control and the architecture of peace. The Stoics had a word for the central cause of human suffering, prosos, the failure to distinguish between what is within our power and what is not. Marcus Aurelius wrote it in a private journal he never intended for anyone to read. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and had everything taken from him, built an entire philosophy around a single distinction between what is ephemen, up to us, and what is uk ephemen, not up to us. What belongs to you, your perception, your response, your choices, the meaning you assign to what happens. What does not belong to you? Other people's choices, the timing of love, the direction of a relationship, whether someone stays or leaves. Read that second list again, slowly, because every ounce of suffering you have carried about this loss that exists in that second category, every hour spent trying to understand their decision, trying to reverse it, trying to find the version of events in which you could have controlled the outcome. That suffering was not just painful, it was borrowed. You were carrying weight that was never assigned to you, in a category of reality that was never within your jurisdiction. The reason this is so difficult to accept is not intellectual, it is emotional. Because releasing what is not within your control feels, before you do it, like abandoning hope. It feels like admitting defeat. It feels like accepting that the outcome you wanted was never possible, and that acceptance feels uncomfortably close to saying that what you wanted did not matter. That you did not matter. But that is not what it means. At all. Releasing control over another person's choices is not a statement about your worth. It is a recognition of their sovereignty. They had the right to make the choice they made, regardless of how much it hurt, regardless of whether it was wise, regardless of whether it was the version of the story you would have written. Their freedom to choose was never yours to override. And the suffering that comes from trying to retroactively override it, from endlessly rehearsing the version of events in which you said the right thing, did the right thing, were enough, is the suffering of attempting the impossible. And here is the spiritual dimension that the Stoics were pointing toward without always naming directly. The moment you release what was never yours to control, you do not just find peace. You find space. The internal space that was occupied by the relentless attempt to manage the unmanageable suddenly becomes available for something else. For creation, for clarity, for the reception of what the universe has been trying to deliver while your hands were full of what you were trying to hold. Releasing control is not resignation. It is not the abandonment of desire or the suppression of love. It is the recognition that the soul's path has an intelligence that the ego cannot override, and that the attempt to override it is always the source of the suffering, never the solution to it. You did not lose control of your life when that person left. You lost the illusion that you ever had control over them. And in that loss, in that specific, particular loss of illusion, something extraordinary was made possible. Something that had been sealed shut by the very intensity of your attachment to that relationship finally began to open. A window. Through the wound itself. The wound was a window. What this person awakened in you. There is something that exists in you now that did not exist before them. Not the grief, that is not what this is about. Beneath the grief, beneath the confusion, beneath every layer of what this relationship cost you, there is something that was not present in the same form before they arrived. A capacity. a depth, an awareness of what you are capable of feeling, of giving, of enduring, of surviving. They did not create that in you, but they activated it. This is the part of the loss that almost no one is willing to examine, because to examine it honestly requires acknowledging that the person who hurt you, or left you, or simply stopped being available, contributed something irreplaceable to your becoming. And that acknowledgement feels dangerously close to gratitude. And gratitude, when you are still in pain, can feel like a betrayal of that pain. But this is not about gratitude for the loss. It is about recognition of what the loss revealed. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." For centuries, that line has been quoted as comfort, as a beautiful idea to hold in difficult moments. But it is not merely poetic. It is descriptive. It is a precise account of a psychological and spiritual mechanism that has been observed across cultures and traditions for millennia. The wound, the real wound, the one that reaches beneath the surface into the deeper architecture of a person, is not just an injury. It is an opening. And what enters through that opening is not metaphorical light. It is actual awareness, actual access to parts of the self that were previously sealed behind protection, behind performance, behind the careful management of how much of oneself one allows to be seen. Before them, perhaps a version of you that had learned to keep certain things safely unexpressed, a version that had become efficient at managing emotional distance, a version that knew on some level that it was not fully available, because being fully available meant being fully vulnerable, and full vulnerability meant the possibility of exactly this kind of pain. And then they arrived, and something opened. And for a period of time, however long it lasted, you were more present, more alive, more connected to your own depth than you had allowed yourself to be. They did not give you that. They gave you permission, permission you were waiting for without knowing you were waiting for it. They created the conditions in which a version of you that had been carefully managed and partially withheld was finally allowed to exist without apology. The wound is that permission becoming permanent, because the version of you that learned to love that deeply, to feel that fully, to want that honestly, that version did not leave when they did. It stayed, and it is standing directly on the other side of the grief, waiting for you to stop looking back long enough to realize it has been there the entire time. The person awakened something in you that now belongs to you unconditionally. No departure can revoke it. No ending can uninstall it. The window that opened through the wound stays open, but only if you choose to look through it rather than spend your life staring at the wound itself. The choice between those two orientations is not dramatic. It does not happen in a single moment of decision. It happens in the small, repeated choices of daily life, whether you speak the thing that needs to be said or swallow it again, whether you allow yourself to want openly or quietly bury it, whether you treat the capacity for depth and feeling that this relationship revealed as a liability to be protected against, or as a gift to be expressed more fully into everything that follows. And there is one more layer beneath even this, one that answers the question you have perhaps been afraid to ask. The question about whether any of this was written, whether it was always going to happen this way, whether you ever had a choice, whether they did. The answer is the most liberating and the most demanding truth in this entire message: fate, free will, and the invisible thread. Here is the question you have been carrying without always knowing how to ask it. Was I always going to lose them? And the deeper version beneath that one: if this was fated, if this was always going to happen, then what was the point of any of it? What was the point of the love, the hope, the vulnerability, the investment, if the ending was already written? This is the question that breaks people, not the loss itself. The question about whether the loss was inevitable. Because if it was inevitable, the suffering feels purposeless. And purposeless suffering is the heaviest thing a soul can carry. But the answer is not what you expect, and it requires holding two things simultaneously that the mind wants to make into opposites. Yes, certain meetings are fated. Certain encounters are arranged at a level of soul agreement that predates this lifetime. The intensity you felt with that person, the sense of recognition that arrived before you had any logical basis for it, the feeling that you had known them before. These are not romantic projections. They are echoes of something real. The connection was not accidental, it was arranged, and yes, certain endings are also fated. Not as punishment, not as failure, but as completion, as the natural conclusion of a soul contract that was never designed to be permanent, only significant. The meeting was written, the transformation was written, the ending was written, but here is what was never written, what you do with it. Consider the difference between a river and its banks. The banks, the terrain through which the river moves, are fixed. The general direction of flow is determined by geography, by the shape of the land, by forces that were in place long before any particular volume of water began its journey. That is the fate, but the specific quality of the water, its clarity or turbulence, its depth or shallowness, the life it sustains or fails to sustain, that is determined by 1,000 choices made along the way. The river cannot choose its banks. It can choose, in every moment, what kind of river it is within them. The fate was the encounter and its conclusion. The free will is everything that happens within you in response. The invisible thread that runs through your entire life's journey, the one connecting every significant loss to every subsequent expansion, that thread is not pulling you toward a predetermined emotional state. It is pulling you toward a predetermined potential, and whether that potential is realized depends entirely on the choices you make in the aftermath of the experiences that were always going to arrive. You were always going to meet them. You were always going to lose them. The version of you that emerges from that loss, that was never fixed, that is yours. Entirely, irrevocably, sovereignly yours. Which means the most important question is not why did this happen, it is what is the pattern underneath it. Because this loss did not arrive in isolation. It arrived as the most recent, most forceful expression of something that has been moving through your life for much longer than this relationship lasted. A pattern. And the reason you need to see it is because the universe did not remove that person to punish you. It removed them to interrupt something that you could not have interrupted on your own. The pattern. This loss was designed to break. Look back. Not at this relationship in isolation, but at the shape of it. The dynamic between you. The way need and distance played against each other. The specific points at which you contracted, made yourself smaller, quieter, more accommodating than you actually were. The moments when you felt something that needed to be said and chose silence instead. The version of yourself you performed in that relationship, and the version of yourself you kept just slightly out of reach. Now ask yourself, have you felt this shape before? Not necessarily with a romantic partner. Perhaps in a friendship that followed the same invisible rules. Perhaps in a family dynamic that taught you long before you were old enough to question it, that love required a particular kind of self-management. That to be loved was to be careful. That full expression was a risk that affection might not survive. The relationship you lost was not the origin of the pattern. It was the latest stage of it. Patterns of this nature have a particular quality that makes them exceptionally difficult to see from the inside. They feel like personality. They feel like the natural shape of who you are, rather than a learned adaptation to circumstances that no longer exist. The tendency to shrink in specific moments does not feel like a strategy. It feels like temperament. The habit of keeping certain things unsaid does not feel like fear. It feels like tact or consideration, or the reasonable recognition that not every feeling needs to be voiced. The pattern has made itself invisible by disguising itself as character. And here is the most important thing about patterns of this kind. They are not your fault. They were formed in conditions you did not choose, at an age when you did not have the capacity to respond differently. They were survival adaptations, intelligent functional responses to an environment that required them. The problem is not that they formed. The problem is that they outlasted the conditions that created them. They followed you out of childhood, out of the family system that generated them, into every relationship that followed, including this one. And the universe, which is not cruel, which is not indifferent, which is not randomly distributing pain among souls, identified that pattern with a precision that your conscious mind could not access. It saw that without an intervention of significant force, the pattern would continue. That you would move from this relationship into the next one carrying the same invisible architecture, shrinking in the same places, silencing yourself at the same moments, mistaking the performance of love for the experience of it. And so it intervened. Not gently, because gentle was not enough. The loss was the pattern interrupt. The removal of that person was the universe collapsing the stage on which the pattern was performing. Not to leave you without a stage, but to give you the chance, for the first time, to build one of your own design. One that does not require you to be less than you are in order for love to remain present. One built on the honest knowledge of what you actually need, what you actually feel, what you are actually willing to accept, and what you are not. This is the sign. This is what it was pointing toward the entire time. Not toward a different person, not toward a different circumstance, not toward some future arrival that will make the past make sense. Toward you. Toward the version of you that does not need to diminish itself to deserve love, that does not confuse the ending of a relationship with the ending of its own worth. That version of you has been waiting, and now that you can see the pattern it was designed to break, you have exactly one thing left to do. The single most powerful act available to any human soul standing in the aftermath of significant loss. Choosing your perception is the most powerful spiritual act. The loss happened. That is fixed, immovable, beyond the reach of any tool, any practice, any perspective. But the meaning of the loss, that has never been fixed, that has always been and remains entirely within your power to determine. This is not a suggestion to manufacture false positivity. It is not an instruction to pretend the pain did not exist, or that the loss was secretly convenient. The pain was real. The love was real. The disruption was real. None of that is being minimized. Spiritual bypassing, the practice of using elevated frameworks to skip over the genuine work of emotional processing, is one of the most insidious forms of self-betrayal available to a spiritually inclined person. This is not that. This is the opposite of that. What is being offered to you is something far more powerful than comfort. The recognition that meaning is not discovered, it is chosen. And the meaning you assign to the most significant experiences of your life does not merely affect how you feel about them. It determines what they produce in you, what they open in you, what they ultimately make possible for you. Viktor Frankl survived 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, and others. He lost his wife, his parents, his manuscript. He endured conditions that systematically stripped every external source of meaning from human existence. And what he discovered in that extremity was not comfort. It was authority. The authority that no external circumstance, however devastating, can revoke. The freedom to choose the meaning of what is happening to you. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." He was not speaking theoretically. He was reporting from the deepest possible engagement with human suffering. And what he found there was not that positive thinking dissolves pain, but that chosen meaning transforms it. That the same event, interpreted as evidence of abandonment, produces a broken soul. Interpreted as an initiation, it produces an expanded one. The law of correspondence does not operate in the external world alone. It operates at the precise intersection of inner and outer reality. What you choose to see in your circumstances determines what your circumstances become capable of generating. A loss interpreted as proof of unworthiness generates a soul that expects to be left. A loss interpreted as a redirectional sign generates a soul that moves with increasing alignment toward what it was always meant to receive. Same event, entirely different trajectory. You have the authority to choose the interpretation that serves your becoming, not the interpretation that feels most immediately comfortable, but the one that is most spiritually true. the one that positions you as a soul in the middle of a purposeful journey, receiving precisely calibrated experiences, moving toward a version of yourself that the pain was always in the process of creating. That choice is not a single moment. It is a practice. It is the practice of returning again and again to the perception that sees the sign rather than the wound, until that perception becomes not an effort, but a default. Until the soul that knows how to read its own journey is not something you reach for, but something you simply are. And when you make that choice, when you genuinely, fully, irrevocably choose to see what this loss was pointing toward rather than what it took, something shifts, not in the external world immediately, but in the quality of your presence in it, in the way you begin to move through your own life, in the particular kind of readiness that settles into a soul that has finally stopped fighting its own becoming. That readiness is not passive. It is not the stillness of resignation or the quiet of someone who has given up wanting. It is the active, awake, forward-facing readiness of someone who knows, not as a belief but as a lived understanding, that what is coming requires the full version of them, not the version that was shaped by the pattern this loss interrupted, the version that is emerging in its place. That readiness is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of the part the universe has been preparing you for. And it began, all of it, the moment you lost that person. You were always meant to receive this message. Do you remember the question from the beginning? Why did this one hurt differently? You have the answer now, not as a concept, as a lived understanding. It hurt differently because it was different, because it was not just a relationship ending. It was a soul contract completing, a cosmic redirection activating, a pattern being interrupted at its root, a wound opening into a window, a sign arriving in the only language precise enough to ensure you would not ignore it. It hurt at the magnitude it did, because the transformation it was initiating operates at the same magnitude. Everything in this message, every layer, every moment of recognition you experienced as the words moved through you, was not information being delivered to a stranger. It was a soul being reminded of what it already knew. Because the truth is that some part of you understood all of this before you pressed play. The understanding was always in you, waiting beneath the grief, beneath the confusion, beneath the exhausting attempt to make an experience make sense that was never meant to be understood from inside the pain. You needed distance. You needed language. You needed permission to consider that what broke you was not a mistake. It was not a mistake. The person was real. The love was real. The loss was real. And the sign was real. All of it simultaneously without contradiction, because that is how the universe operates. It does not choose between beauty and purpose. It does not separate love from growth. It uses the most real, most significant, most irreplaceable experiences of your life as the instruments of your becoming, because anything less significant would not be enough to reach you where you actually live. And here is what no framework, no philosophy, no spiritual tradition can give you, but that you already possess. The ability to carry all of it at once, the grief and the gratitude, the love and the release, the recognition that it was real, and the recognition that it was complete. These are not contradictions. They are the full texture of a soul that has survived something significant and emerged with its capacity for love not diminished, but deepened, refined, freed from the distortions of the pattern that shaped it before. You did not find this video at a random moment in a random sequence of clicks. Something in you was ready. Ready to stop carrying the weight of an unanswered question. Ready to release the version of the story that kept you frozen. Ready to begin moving. Not away from the love you experienced, but forward into the fullness of the soul that love helped reveal. The next chapter of your life will not be written by grief. It will not be written by the pattern this loss interrupted. It will not be written by the version of you that learned to make itself small enough to be acceptable to someone who was only ever passing through. It will be written by the version of you that is standing here right now, having survived something that was always going to arrive, having received a message that was always intended for you, having chosen, consciously, freely, irrevocably, to let it mean something. The loss was a sign. You have read it now. And nothing, not grief, not time, not the next relationship, not the next loss, will ever be able to take from you what this moment of understanding has placed inside you. The message was always coming. You were always going to receive it. And you were always going to be exactly ready enough, right now, in this moment, to finally let it change you.